So we often talk about some of the other stations within the belt, major stations like Ceres, for example, but I figured today we could take a closer look at one that doesn't quite get the spotlight it deserves, but did play a major role within the story of the Expanse. Let's take a closer look at Eros. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So Eros, known today as 433 Eros, is one of the largest near-Earth asteroids we've encountered so far. It's often described as a lumpy potato due to its awkward shape, and has actually already been visited by 2 spacecraft in our timeline. However, by the time of the Expanse, Eros is a sprawling space station, home to over 500,000 belters. So today we're going to take a closer look at how Eros went from being the lumpy potato we know today to the sprawling center of populations within the belt. Eros was one of the first colonies established by humanity beyond the inner planets, or, beyond Earth and Mars. It actually was a pretty obvious first stop for humanity's expansion into the asteroids and moons of the outer planets. Eros spends a portion of its orbit actually closer to the Sun than Mars, being one of the few asteroids to actually come in beyond the orbit of Mars. This made it an interesting destination for people migrating from Earth and Mars to the asteroids. It was closer to home, which often made them feel more comfortable, and it was less strenuous of a trip. Eros quickly became a center of economics, finance, and industry within the belt, quickly growing to be the belt's largest space station. And because of its role as one of the first major stations within the belt, it's often credited as being the birthplace of the belt itself, with many of the modern belter movements originating on Eros. However, the celebration didn't last forever on Eros, and when Ceres was spun up, Ceres being a much larger celestial body with a lot more to offer, it became a more tantalizing location for most businesses. You see, being a newer space station, Ceres had more modern dock facilities, more modern really everything, and quickly began siphoning off businesses from Eros. Slowly but surely, people, companies, and industries left Eros for Ceres, leaving Eros sort of a backwater. But there is one industry that stayed pretty firmly rooted on Eros, and that's shipbuilding and repair. You see, Ceres' newer, more modern dock facilities charged more for berthing there than other stations across the belt, and Eros already had significant dry dock facilities from its time as the center of the belt. So it became the natural sort of home of shipbuilding within the belt, a role it often shared with various space stations across the system. And as the number of ships that came to visit Eros went down as industries moved off the asteroid to other locations across the belt, the cost of mooring there for longer amounts of time went down significantly. As a result, it became a popular stop-off for ships that needed repairs or ships that just needed to be refueled, since it was cheaper to fuel there too, because the docking facilities were older and less advanced. But being a common stop for ships left some interesting markets open for the taking. You see, much like in the age of sail, sailors come in from sea and they want particular things. So the streets of Eros became full of bars, taverns, and brothels, as well as fairly large hotels with some seedier practices. This became particularly appealing to spacefarers who had spent long times on their ships drifting about the system. But this environment, along with the fact that a lot of the jobs were leaving Eros to head to other places across the belt like Ceres, meant that Eros became a perfect breeding ground for crime and extremism. With the average earnings of the citizens of Eros dropping significantly, more desperation set in the streets, and it led to Eros being sort of known as a backwater across the system by the time of the Expanse. A washed-up has-been station that is sort of basking in the remnants of former glory long gone, infested with criminals and brothels. And it's the state that we see Eros in at the time of the Eros incident. You see, security on Eros was handled by the Protogen Corporation until they handed it off to several small subsidiaries, which began laying the groundwork for carrying out a large-scale experiment using the protomolecule. During that experiment, the protomolecule was released in various strategic locations across the colony, and the people were ushered into special chambers where they would be exposed to ridiculously high amounts of radiation, which was the perfect environment for the protomolecule to spread. After fleeing Eros, the Rocinante would eventually return with the Belter ship Guy Molinari. In returning, their intentions were to knock the asteroid into the sun, ultimately destroying the colony and preventing it from being accessed, and preventing the protomolecule from spreading. However, the protomolecule at that point had spread throughout the station enough to allow it to preserve itself, dodging the Nauvoo, which was fired at it like a battering ram, and putting itself on a course for Earth. And after even the weapons of mass destruction deployed by Earth to attempt to destroy Eros failed, the only thing that was able to set Eros onto a different course was Miller, who happened to be on board the station, and had managed to convince the protomolecule to direct it somewhere else, which ended up being Venus. Eros ultimately finished its story colliding into Venus, an event that many believed left the protomolecule completely destroyed. However, it would return later to form the ring gates, which leads to a whole nother can of worms. But as you can see, Eros itself has a very unique history, and it played a really big cultural role within the belt, and it's understandable that after the release of the protomolecule on the station, that resulted in the death of over 500,000 Belters, the various factions of the belt were itching for revenge, and they got their revenge in an attack on a listening station, Thoth Station. And if you'd like to learn about how that attack played out, I'll leave a link up here to my battle analysis video on that battle. And I would like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think the belt ever really recovered from the destruction of Eros. Eros used to be this major port within the belt that still held some pretty significant sway, so its destruction certainly had effects across the belt. Let me know if you think the belt ever really managed that. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in the Expanse, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.